Well, let's talk about something positive. I think Lauren's got some positive stuff to talk about here. He went and saw a movie over the weekend that he wants to talk about. He wants to discuss the film. He wants to discuss the production company behind the film. And from what I understand, it's going to be glowing. So go ahead, Lauren.
Who am I again?
Lauren.
Okay. Oh, okay. So a year ago, when my channel was still just freshly out of the package and still smelled like the bubble gum it came wrapped in, I did a review of a film that I also wrapped in a conversation about the studio who was releasing it. And that was called Blumhouse, We Need to Talk. I have no illusions that they watched my content or would have ever responded to it. But if they did, then I'm to blame for them going back in a completely contrarian direction. Because I went to go see Freaky. Freaky is not a film for human consumption. It's a film for media bots to feast on and tear apart and micromanage the distribution and advertising for the film. It's so obviously and transparently not for me as a fan, or probably anyone watching us as fans, because it really starkly showcases that there are two different horror fandoms currently running concurrently. One are what I call traditional fans, which are people who grew up with the genre or are growing up with the genre, because this isn't really about age, and love the genre for what it does and how it makes them feel, and that's important because it's about how their emotions are playing with the movies. And then there's the other group, which is typically millennials, but it, again, is not relegated just to an age group. And these are people who are really just looking to see a film that screams as loud as it can to validate opinions they already hold and need to express in everything they speak or they hear or they write or they read or they smell or they excrete. The reality is this isn't a movie as much as it's a bad concept come to life. There's an old Dead Milkman song called The Thing That Only Eats Hippies, which is about creating a monster for the 4-H club that goes around eating dinosaur rockers. This movie is exactly that. This movie is an attack on older fans in a way that we've kidded about quote unquote woke movies doing before. This isn't really woke. This is beyond that, because at least a movie has its politics, but it's also doing its own thing, telling its own story. That's one thing. Freaky is just endless barrages of slogans in place of dialogue, and literally just cardboard cutouts of every diverse figure they can pick to make sure that there's inclusion for absolutely every archetype that we celebrate in our society. The movie doesn't even make this it's not even a puzzle game. It's not like you're searching for anything. My issue with this is not so much that I bought a ticket and I hated the movie. It's that should this thing prove to have a long life and it uses its bad box office and its weekend as just an excuse because COVID happened, we're looking at more of these films. And Blumhouse has been the probably worst offender for this kind of non-entertainment, whereas it becomes a form of infotainment without the tainment side. We're just dropping all the keywords that people respond to if they have a certain mindset. And by the way, it doesn't really matter which side of the spectrum this comes from. It would be annoying whether this was, red or blue or left or right or top or bottom. It's just, can we please get movies back that tell stories with compelling characters and dynamics that we can relate to in our lives, rather than characters speaking in a dialect that none of us can even recognize as anything we encounter in our daily lives. So I'm done with Blum. Blum, you've lost your chance. A year ago, I put my foot in the sand saying, this got to get better or I'm out the door. And not only has it not gotten better, it's gotten far, far worse, to the point where the movie was intolerable. It was the worst movie-going experience I've had, and I can't tell you how long. And I've seen some bad films. I'm talking, this is as bad as that midnight screening of Battlefield Earth that I endured. This is
wow.
This is as bad as anything I've stepped into and gone out going, what did I waste my money on? This made The Turning look like just, an absent-minded mistake. I'm sure someone out there is going to champion this movie and talk about how, oh, it's not for you, it's for a different audience. But the thing is, I've always been able to get into films from generations with different mindsets. My favorite films are from the 1930s. So to say that I'm looking for someone to speak exactly my language or else I'm going to walk out the door is insane. And I'm not necessarily offended by any of their concepts. I'm offended by them screaming their virtue signaling at the top of their lungs instead of creating an entertaining movie. So no, Blum, we're out of chips. I'm walking away from the table.
Here's something that I think is interesting. The more inclusive I've noticed that a movie wants to be, or a video game or whatever, the more inclusive that it appears to be, or that it preaches that it is, when people say, well, I didn't like it, they go, what was it made for you? Why aren't you including me? Why isn't it, why aren't I part of the inclusion? So I love that rebuttal of, well, it wasn't made for you, but I thought this was inclusive. I thought you wanted everybody in on this. Well, not you.
It's really frustrating too, because you can create characters from all these different backgrounds with all these different skin colors or religions or whatever you're choosing to, whatever surface level detail that, Martin Luther King Jr. was not talking about when he talked about the content of our characters. But you can pick any of that and put them all on screen. But unless you write real dialogue and create real characters, it's pointless. And that's what they've done here. They've just created non-characters. This is your stand-in. This is, the snappy best friend of color. This is your gay friend. But there's no characters there. They speak in just platitudes towards their movements. It's bad writing, and the tendency to make these sort of films is always going to be rooted in bad writing, because instead of starting with, what do I need to tell the best story, they're starting with a checklist of things they feel they need to include in the movie. Now, a great writer might be able to overcome that, but let's be honest. Do you guys really think that they were out there canvassing for the best writer to write Freaky? Were they looking for the modern John Steinbeck to make sure they just approach the exact right tone on this thing? No.
I heard Mamet did a pass on it.
I bet a hard pass, probably.
Was it at least fun? Was it at least entertaining in any way? You didn't have any fun with it at all?
Do you have fun with Geico commercials?
Well,
if you like Geico commercials, you'll love it, because it's about as deep as a Geico commercial.
Oh. I probably won't like it.
There's gore in it. If you want gore, it's there. I mean, but that's not enough by itself for me. It just isn't.
I mean, Blumhouse is really, they went from and we've talked about this before, but I mean, they went from oh man, they're the savior of horror. In a really short period of time, they've gone from you're the savior of the genre to everything's just trash.
Yeah. And this one is actually insulting. So, and not mildly insulting either.
I'm going to bring up a Blumhouse movie later that I actually liked this year. So,
I hate that argument of it's not made for you, because there's tons of things that aren't made for me that I love.
Yeah.
Like I loved Thoroughbreds. I loved Booksmart. Lady Bird. These are great films. About teenage girls, and
right,
I thought they were great movies. So I really hate that argument.
That seems like something I never heard people say that years ago. Oh, it wasn't made for you, or this movie's not made for me. I didn't hear that years ago, because I mean, it seems like that's a whole new thing now.
James Whale made a film in 1935 that became my favorite film of all time. By definition, because I was not born until half a century later, he didn't make that movie for me.
Yeah. Well, and let me tell you, nobody is making movies for anybody. They're making movies for money.
For the marketing team.
Yeah. Well, for the marketing team. Yeah. But I mean, they're not. Yeah, exactly. They're making movies for money. So, I mean, I don't know.
I don't like them saying that, they don't make it for people like us. Why? I think our generation probably still the ones keeping them together. I don't understand. Why can't they just make everything in English? I don't understand why they got to put it in a language, the kids' lingo today. My son would probably be able to decipher all of it for me, but do I really want to sit down and have him do that? No.
But that's how they pretend to talk. That's not even how they really talk.
I know.
Right.
But so the other thing about this film I just want to mention, so if anyone thinks I'm exaggerating, the film opens with a line of dialogue, which is never underestimate the violence an old white man is capable of, and ends with having balls sucks. Those are the dialogue at the beginning and the end of the film. And between it, it continues that theme in every scene. So my problem isn't necessarily the dialogue itself. It's that you're actually telling part of your audience, go away.
I was going to say, like, we're talking about inclusivity, but this sounds the opposite. It's like in an attempt to make something inclusive, they've completely shoot out too many people.
Absolutely.
And I mean, they lost me at Vince Vaughn. But
well, I didn't even say it, but his performance is painfully Jim Carrey too. So, I mean, a late Jim Carrey too.
There for a while too, Vince Vaughn was sort of looked at as like, this indie darling, everybody loved him, and then Psycho happened. And then
And I think someone thought that was the clever part of like casting him in this. Is like, oh, we got the guy who was in the Psycho remake. You get it?
I didn't.
No, none of us got it because we're just too annoyed by everything else on screen.
Yeah. Thank you, Nico, for the $5 super chat. He says he is here to listen, learn, and like it. Thank you, Nico.
Class is in session.
I actually I like Vince Vaughn in comedy, but when he's done his more serious stuff, like he was okay in The Cell, but seriously, he took me out of it because he's not believable. He's not believable in those parts. He's a funny man, and he should stick to what he's good at, I think.
He seemed grossly miscast in that movie.
Yeah.
Vince Vaughn is like this alcoholic, burned out cop. Vince Vaughn was the top of your list for that. You know what I mean? J-Lo as like some sort of scientist. It's a stretch, but I'll buy it. You know. But then Vince Vaughn pops up and it's like, what?
He's done some dramatic roles.
Vincent D'Onofrio is the bomb in The Cell, though.
I was just going to say Vincent D'Onofrio is what makes that movie so great.
Brawl and Cell Block 99 was really good. I thought he did a good job in that.
Yeah, I started watching that. I probably got about 45 minutes into it and I had to stop it, and I've just never returned. But I was locking it up to that point. And there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of love for Blumhouse in the chat either. So
I used to be a big proponent, just like you were, Piz. It used to be almost the event company, and even their opening company ident. If you look at it, it references Evil Dead, Night of the Living Dead, Poltergeist, all in that ident. If you look close enough, they were screaming like, "We're one of you," and now they seem to be telling all of us, "We don't want you."
Yeah.
So it's tragic.
watch or be punished.